places the process of relating one another at the heart of learning and well-being. You have been invited and convened here by the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, the Taos Institute, and the University of Wales Trinity St. David. My name is Andrea La Peña. I'm the Deputy Director of the Lifelong Learning Platform, and I will be your host for today. As an umbrella NGO based in Brussels, like we are, most of our activities are geared towards policy and advocacy. And lately, we have been exploring the connections between educational evaluation and the well-being of learners, joining forces with some of the speakers that I will present in a second. Very happy to see familiar faces, and for us, focusing the conversation on well-being of learners and educators is an essential part of building lifelong learning societies, because the lack of well-being can heavily hinder learning processes, and this is true for all education environments. So let me take you a little bit through the agenda of today. During the webinar, we will amplify the voices of pupils and teachers. Their asks and their wants will be presented in brief but captivating videos, you will see, as well as by a student speaker, all the while dissecting the prevailing paradigm that we see today of assessment. We will have a sketch of different ways forward, just to hear different voices and different opinions on how to better nurture pupil engagement, relational well-being, and flourishing of human beings in learning environments. To then continue with the discussion about shifting the school systems to a more whole approach with the panel discussion. Perhaps before I lose myself any further in the agenda, and that's already been a good insight, I would like to state a few housekeeping rules for today. I take that after 2 years of pandemic or even more, we're all accustomed to online events and webinars. And I trust that most of you are aware of online etiquette, but nonetheless, I will repeat it just for the sake of us being on the same page. I would kindly ask you all to keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. And if you feel comfortable, possibly turn the camera on. It's nice to see faces rather than names. You can definitely use the chat to interact with each other, like you've been doing ever since we connected. And you should know that questions will be collected in the chat box, so feel free to make them pour in. As you might have seen when joining, this webinar is recorded. So in case you do not want to be taken on screen, we invite you to either turn off your camera or even possibly put a different name if you don't want your name to appear. I would then like to proceed with an icebreaker. With this, I would like to ask my colleagues to open the breakout rooms. Usually breakout rooms come at a different stage in a webinar, but we thought of going straight up into smaller groups. For the next 5 minutes, I would like for you to chat one another, to say who you are and why you are here. So we wanted to grasp a little bit a sense of the audience that is assembled here today. So if you see the invite to breakout rooms, feel free to join and to chat a little bit, to make new friends if possible, and just have a warmer conversation.
Hello. Regards from Brussels. Oh, I see Christopher, who I know. Hello,
Hi, Christopher. I know Christopher too.
Hi, I'm Adriana from Brazil.
Hi, Adriana.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Yoga, is it?
Jorge.
Jorge.
So I see you know each other already, the three of you.
No, I know Christopher from various places, but I don't know. I don't know Adriana. No.
No, I don't know any of you. Where are you from?
So I'm from Colombia. So my name is Jorge. I work with Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, which is one of the hosts of this event. and also a proud member of the Alliance for Childhood, for Childhood, of course. And I'm based in Brussels. So just to go into the space, I'm here because well, we organized the event, but why is this important? I mean, the educational revolution, which is something so important for assuring well-being, you know, it really passes through rethinking assessment. You know, that's one of the things I learned preparing this webinar, and you're going to see the assessment practice is something at the very core of what education is, and we can really get an interesting shift into education for human flourishing going into this specific issue. So I would like to learn more about that.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll pass the ball to Christopher.
Right. Hello, everybody. I'm chair of the Alliance for Childhood in Brussels. We're just recovering from a quality of childhood seminar we had on Tuesday. It was very encouraging because we had 3 members of the Parliament and 2 Commission officials all saying that the basis on how we educate our children has to change radically, that we're not fulfilling the needs of the children of today, and we really have to look fundamentally on the whole question of schooling. I've heard it from individual MEPs before, but this was the first time they sat there as a panel with Commission officials and said it vocally, all of them. So this was encouraging that things over the last few decades have been slowly changing. The iceberg has been moving, and hopefully in our direction.
I go next.
Yes.
So yes, I'm Wendy. I'm in the UK. I've been engaged in this issue for many years now. So in the UK, I run the Safe Childhood Movement and National Children's Day UK, but I have my big project is the Flourish Project, which is absolutely focused on what optimizes well-being over the lifespan. And over the last 9 months, I've been working with a partner to develop a digital well-being platform specific to look at how you measure well-being over that schools are living systems and how you measure that with them as active contributors. I'm also involved in Harvard we're developing an educational futures podcast looking at how you disrupt education systems, bringing in people from across sectors to acknowledge the fact, which fortunately I agree with Christopher, worldwide we now have acknowledgement that we have to move the focus of the purpose of education away from attainment to flourishing, and I think that now is almost like agreed across all the leading organizations. But then how do you measure flourishing, and how, you know, of which attainment is one aspect. So I'm very embedded in that, and I also run in the UK the Spirituality and Education Alliance, to say that spirituality, as in there is an innate intelligence that underpins all this, is fundamental to human flourishing. So I'm very involved in lots of conversations around, and I'm a member of the Alliance, but unfortunately couldn't make the conference. So yeah, very happy to be here, and always curious to see. I'm curious to see what other organizations are doing, but I'm particularly interested in how we bring people together, because we're all saying the same thing. How do we join up the dots so there's cross?
And welcome back, everyone. I hope that you've had nice discussions in the breakout rooms. I think and hope that you broke the ice in a way. So this should be a very nice way into the webinar. I wanted to transition right away to prompt you to watch a video with us. A video from an innovative relation-centered school in Amsterdam, Lanterna Magica, that the Inspectorate for Education has even recognized as embodying excellence. We will now see the video. Very soon.
Just give me 1 second, sorry.
No problem.
Welkom in het gebouw van Laterna Magica in Amsterdam. De plek waar alle kinderen tot 12 jaar van 's ochtends vroeg tot 's avonds laat kunnen leren, spelen en ontdekken.
Als we erover praten, dus tegen iets van een interview, dan zeggen we meestal Laterna Magica. Maar als we er zelf over praten, dan zeggen we, ja, ik heb op school dit gedaan.
Meestal zit je op andere scholen de hele tijd in één ruimte. En hierbij wissel je steeds van ruimte.
We gaan ook veel vaker op uitjes en dat soort dingen. En dat maakt deze school ook heel speciaal.
Het is anders dan normale scholen. Het is een soort van vrijkeuzeschool.
Ik vind het leuker om ook nog iets anders te doen dan alleen maar rekenen en spelling.
Er zijn mensen die zijn heel erg praktisch willen werken. Die kunnen naar het aannemersbedrijf om daar te gaan bouwen en zo.
Het productiebureau die regelt dan alles zodat wij op het podium kunnen dansen.
Ik zit in het ontwerpteam. Wij ontwerpen posters, visitekaartjes, reclames en dat soort dingen.
Wij zijn nu aan het masseren, zodat je weer helemaal rustig wordt.
Het is heel lekker. Dit is het naaiatelier. Er wordt heel veel genaaid en heel veel ontwerpen gemaakt.
Ik ben bezig met een boek schrijven. Komt ongeveer over een maand uit.
Ik ben vegetarische lasagne aan het maken.
Wat is gewoon?
Gorgonzola.
Gorgonzola is een soort kaas.
Het ruikt lekker.
Kinderen leren en spelen binnen en buiten schooltijd in Laterna Magica en kunnen hun talenten op hun eigen manier ontwikkelen.
Deze recepten hebben we allemaal gemaakt. Ja, dat kan je kopen bij de takeaway en dan hoef je niet meer boodschappen te doen. Ik heb ook andere vrienden en die zitten dan op een andere school en dan hebben ze weer dezelfde dag gehad. En bij ons is dat gewoon nooit hetzelfde.
Je kan eigenlijk meer aan je eigen talenten werken. Er zijn ook soms drama-workshops. Daar kunnen mensen voor theater naartoe gaan.
Ik heb hier een musical gedaan.
Je leert ook om jezelf durven te laten zien. Eerst stond ik meestal een beetje achterin, omdat ik alles nog niet echt goed wist. Maar nu heb ik wel meer zelfvertrouwen daarin gekregen.
Laterna Magica is een van de vele kindercentra waar professionals uit onderwijs, kinderopvang en jeugdhulp dagelijks vanuit één visie werken met kinderen.
Kinderen zijn hier mede-eigenaar van de leer- en leefomgeving. En dat is heel erg motiverend voor kinderen. Dat is echt. Dat is bijvoorbeeld de dierenverzorgers, dat is de kinderkunstuitleen, huismeesters zijn. Elk kind heeft hier wel een rol en daarmee hou je ook die nieuwsgierigheid vast. Durven ze dingen uit te proberen, durven ze ook fouten te maken en daar leer je van.
Er zijn denk ik ook niet veel scholen die dieren en vooral varkens op hun school hebben.
En je leert ook echt verantwoordelijk te zijn voor de dieren. Het is wel leuk zijn als iedereen de kans kreeg om dit te doen.
Ik denk uiteindelijk dat dit eigenlijk een normale school gaat worden. Tenminste, dat hoop ik. Want ik vind dat alle kinderen in Nederland wel zo'n school verdienen.
Hij ging wel beter. Ik had hem.
I'm very jealous because I never really got to have Gorgonzola in school, as I recall. There was one thing that one of the children said, and is that in traditional schools, you always experience the same space. And here, this is a good example of co-creative education, where the pupils and the learners get to have a say in what they are learning. And I think that the next speaker will be best placed to talk about this. I'm very happy to welcome Professor Kenneth Gergen, President of the Taos Institute and of the Mustin Professor of Psychology of Swarthmore College. Professor Gergen is also the co-author of Beyond the Tyranny of Testing, Relational Evaluation in Education. And he will now speak on towards evaluation as a contribution to co-creative education. Welcome, Professor. I thought I saw the professor in our audience back a few minutes ago. I might have gotten misunderstood. Maybe we can wait to see if Professor Guggen is still with us.
I believe there's a recording, Andrea, in case there were technical hitches.
That is great. If we have the video recording, we can go straight to it.
It's truly inspiring to me to see the range of participants in this symposium today. From all over the world, we have here teachers, educators, researchers, parents, and even students, all sensing that there is something fundamentally broken within our contemporary educational systems. And somewhere towards the center of that brokenness lies the form of assessment, the testing, the grading. Indeed, if we're successful today in this webinar, I think we'll begin to appreciate that indeed the practice of testing is the fundamental key to major transformation in that system. Let me try to expand on that. Now, in terms of testing or grading itself, I think we're all basically aware of the traditional problems which have been accentuated, indeed, within recent years of competition, high-stakes testing, as it's called. We know that students suffer year after year, month after month, week after week, their well-being impaired by the anxiety of having to be tested against each other. How will I rank? Am I acceptable? What will my parents think of me? What will my teacher think of me? And indeed, what about my colleagues, my friends? Am I better than they are, worse than they are? The competition continues. And indeed, in the United States, at just this point, the amount of money spent on pharmaceuticals or antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs for adolescents is skyrocketing. And we all know of the toll of suicidal deaths taking place among high school students in competitive nations of the world. Those things are pretty well known, pretty well documented. We also know that testing takes a toll on learning, the very love of learning, curiosity, what it is to want to know. And indeed, young people are ambitious about knowing. They're interested in many, many things. They just don't happen to be on the curriculum of our schools. So what we require then is essentially the passing of tests, where students are basically interested in how I can make the best test scores. So that testing indeed shapes the interest of the students, which is to say, interested in scoring. There was a cartoon featured in a weekly news magazine here in the United States. It's a college graduate. He's just graduating, he's filled with his robes, he's greeting his parents, and he says, "Hooray, hooray, I don't have to learn anything ever again." That's the approach we have towards education. Now, these things are pretty well known, as I said. Where it becomes more threatening and more important is when you consider what education is in terms of the needs of the future. This system, basically, the system of education is basically over a century old, and yet the world has changed enormously. And we know at this point that what we need to know, what we need to prepare for, we cannot predict. Problems of the world are enormously complex, often threatening, and it requires at this time students who are able to work together, or to tolerate ambiguity, to consider multiple perspectives, to weave them together, and to work with others in forming solutions. These are indeed towards the center of the UNESCO goals for sustainable development. But what does our system of education do for this? Standardization and testing of materials that perhaps no one will need and have no interest for the students involved. So there's no preparation for what we need in terms of the future of the world. There's a more subtle issue here at stake as well. And that is, well, let me approach it from this way. What does the current education prepare us to do, prepare our ways of relating? What does it do in the way of enabling us to move together, to appreciate each other, to work together, to understand each other, and to grow in terms of each other, savoring and cherishing the unity, the relational process itself? Because the system we have now, again, supported and embedded by grading and testing, is one of competition, me against you. It teaches us all to take care of ourselves first. We matter, not the other person. To be suspicious of the other, to feel that the other is always trying to get better than us. We prepare ourselves for independence, to individual striving, and the sacrifice, if anything, it looks like the common good, we together. So basically, we're talking about transformation of an entire system. Let me talk about that. The design of the educational system that we inherit from the preceding century is much like that of a factory. That is, it's designed for efficiency and mass production. It meant trying to take masses of young people and educate them as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Standardization was essential, and testing became the means of ensuring that education was functioning well. That is, testing is essentially, you might say, a form of quality control. Now that system, again, is industrial in its nature. It is a rational system with each unit designed to do its thing, to function on its own. That is, you have an administrative function, which has its demands and requirements, and teaching, which also one trains for and has its requirements and standards, and then students for whom we test. It's essentially a mechanistic system where all the relations are mechanical. Again, it's designed for one thing, and that is to produce high education, low cost, efficiently as possible. Now consider the forms of relationship that are built into that system. Everyone out for themselves, everyone attempting to do the best they can for themselves, but there's no attention then to how they relate. Is that important? Well, consider this. Look at language. The way we speak, what we use to get along together. The bare basis of what we call knowledge, often, typically in language. No one invented language. Language only came into being through a process of relating, agreements, coordinations, what we together view as meaningful language. As language lies somewhere towards the center of our being able to relate at all. Now, what I'm trying to get at here is that if you take knowledge, for example, What counts as knowledge, how we create it, why it's important to us, is all very much like language itself. It is created within a process of relating. What if we placed relating towards the center of a way of looking at education, not as a machine, but as a process of we, co-creating, generating value, creating together? Let's abandon that mechanical view and replace it with something that looks like a continuous process of relating, so that what we care for in that educational system is the quality of those relationships, the capacity of those relationships to generate excitement, to generate an enthusiasm for learning, generate an enthusiasm for working with each other. At this point, you can begin to see the linkage between testing and the future, in the sense that if we change the nature of that testing process so that it becomes centered on relationships, built into that process of evaluation is a relationship that is not mechanistic, that is not creating competition, that is not creating a challenge to my self-esteem at every turn. But we build into that relation to the evaluation process relationships on which we thrive, which draw us into it, which make us want to learn, bring enthusiasm, not only with our mates, with our teachers, with our parents, and with the local community. So let's turn towards relational evaluation for a moment. Educators have been well aware that tests and grades undermine the well-being of students and detract from the learning process itself. And the result has been an array of innovations that is creating alternatives to testing and grading, alternatives which place relations at the center of concern. That is, trying to arrange ways of evaluation which are far more dialogic and more collaborative, which place a value in the students and the value in the relationship of students with each other, their teachers, their parents, and the community. And we'll hear a lot more about those in just a few minutes. But I mentioned earlier that testing and grading indeed is the linchpin, the fulcrum to major transformation. Why do I say that? Well, educators have also been aware that traditional teaching methods, top-down teaching methods of lecturing and grading, predetermined resources of information simply stamped into the curriculum for mastery, isn't working anymore. Students come in, they often know far more about various topics than their teachers, topics in which they're very interested. So in effect, there has been a kind of a stealth development of an array of pedagogies which are far more sensitive to the quality of relations. Dialogic classrooms, classes in which relating with each other is the primary form of learning. Collaborative classrooms with projects among students together. Project-based learning in which we together, groups together, work on projects, trying to solve complex problems together. These are exciting pedagogies. They work. High-tech, high school, for example, that system in the United States is almost based solely on project-based learning. There are no classes with chairs arranged in a row. There are no tests. It's primarily projects. So if you open the door to relational evaluation, where it's not scoring on tests that's important, you also open the door to these arrays of learning. Well, those kinds of pedagogies have been largely suppressed because no one knows how to grade them. So we don't use them very often or tentatively. Without that demand for test scores, those kinds of pedagogies can flourish, and along with them, the diminishment of standardization. So here you begin to see, you transform the testing, the relationally centered evaluation, you also transform the forms of learning, and you transform the demands for standardization, and you create a culture in which the process of relating, of working together, not for oneself, but within relationships, becomes central. And herein lies to basically the future of our lives together on this planet. So testing may seem a small part of the educational problem or challenge, but indeed, if we can work on that, it opens the way to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the professor. It does open a way to the future. There have been so many of the messages in this video that touched me. The idea that standardized assessment or testing is essentially quality control, as the professor said, is something that I share often in our way. And the idea that co-creative evaluation should include the learners and they should have a say in what evaluation should be, what assessment should be, because otherwise standardized assessment does hinder well-being of learners and educators alike. I see that there's a lot of interaction in the chat. I'm very happy about this. I hope that you have appreciated the messages that we have shared so far. One of the key questions for this webinar addresses promising practices. What is out there that can be translated into other learning environments, into other schools, and what kind of relational approaches we can have to evaluate education? Can these practices be found among our current realities, and how can we nurture them? So I would like to call up two of our next speakers, Professor Cherto Gill from the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, and Shanti George from the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, because I'm sure that they can provide some of the answers based on two books that curate creative practices in relational evaluation and assessment. So you're already next to me, wonderful work by our colleagues in the background. I will start off by asking Cherto, perhaps, tell us a little bit more about the emergence of these two books and what the ways forward are.
Thank you. Yeah, I put the book behind me. So this book was inspired by a research I participated, I think about 12 years ago now, in 3 kinds of UK schools: public, private, and progressive schools. The project engaged students as researchers to explore how they perceive secondary education. And you can imagine, Andrea, across these diverse settings, students' experience of schooling varied enormously. So it came to us as a big surprise to observe that their response to 2 main questions were not only similar, but almost identical. So the first question was what they loved, what young people loved most in education. The answer was unanimous: nourishing relationships, such as friendship with peers, good rapport with teachers, and even connections and deep connections with subjects and learning. Young people shared that these are essential for their well-being. They came to school for their friends, for this nourishing relationship. The second question was what they enjoyed least in education. Well, you may have guessed, high-stakes testing. Young people felt, just like Ken pointed out, this was a major cause of stress, mental health problems, and for some with boredom. So students asked at the end of that research to us, is there anything you can do or we can do so that education is not about exams, not about grades? So that was the beginning of our next research, joined by Ken Gergen. This time, the research focused on those practices that could breathe life to student experience in schools. And what we discovered this time around also surprised us. Although we felt devastatingly impossible under this kind of overarching domination of testing and grading, there has always been light in classroom, in staff rooms, or in the playground, in communities. Beautiful, exciting practice of evaluation are found everywhere. What's in common about these practices, as Ken summarized so eloquently, is that they are grounded in the relational. So that was how this book came about. It outlines a vision for education that has students' well-being at its core, and develops a theory that articulates how relational approach to educational evaluation can support learning and enrich well-being. But Shanti, you have even more exciting story to tell about how your book came about.
I'm not sure if it's more exciting. It's certainly different, and it's a book of which I'm only one of the co-authors. So this is the book, Assessment as Dialogue. The link will be in the chat. And it has a very different origin in an exchange with a policymaker, a very senior policymaker, no less than the Director General of Education of the European Commission in Brussels, who in 2016 asked a group of civil society organizations, we policymakers have a lot of statistical reports, a lot of thick research analyses. Can you add to this some inspiring stories of change? How does change happen in education, in schools, in classrooms? Tell us about this. And this book is the result, and it came into being to capture and celebrate the stories of teachers and of school directors who dared to change the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for summarizing a little bit the context that brought about these two books. Shraddha, how would you summarize the key messages? How this is like the context that gave life to those, but is there any particular message that you would like to put across now?
I think as a key message, which I've already touched upon, which is a central piece of the book, is an innovative relational theory on educational evaluation. You may have noted I deliberately chose the term evaluation as opposed to other terms such as assessment, measurement, appraisal, etc., because these latter ones tend to carry strong connotation of what Ken already mentioned, an objective judgment, implying that learning can best observed and improved through quality control, carried out ideally by some external authority. By contrast, using the word evaluation is about valuing, strengthening, empowering. So in the context of education, it's about appreciating the values in the activities and experience of teaching and learning. In so doing, evaluation can replace the emphasis on students' deficiency with the focus on the potentiality, possibility, and even opportunity for well-being. And I may even add well-becoming. So valuing helps affirm students' equal intrinsic value as persons and support the emergence of their strengths. Well, Ken already talked about it. Valuing and appreciating is not an isolated act, but always involves the relational. So we conceive the evaluation as co-inquiry, a shared collaborative process where students, teachers, even parents and others in the community can come together and co-inquire into the qualities and experience of a learning and the meaningfulness of these educative activities. Unlike summative assessment, I may say a relational orientation to the evaluation is always formative. And engaged student teachers are active participants in learning and equal partners in what we may call sense making. So if you look at it this way, then our book carries this message that evaluation ought to serve three purposes. And you can see testing does none of those. The first is to enhance learning process, improve learning environment. The second is empower resilience and sustain interest, students' interest and engagement. The third purpose is to enrich learning experience and well-being. And if you think about evaluation through this lens, and when you imagine that the evaluation serving these purposes tend to carry out relationally, you realize it necessarily involves practice such as dialogue, listening, conversation, questioning, deliberation, reflection, collaboration, and so on and so forth. So, and many people can join in the evaluation and invites our attention, our care, and responsibility. And I'll pass it on to Shanti to add more to that.
Yes, but I believe, Andrea, that there is an exciting interruption.
Yes, you are correct, Shanti. If you don't mind, I would like to call up on the floor the member of the European Parliament, Marcos Ros, who kindly joined us today. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Ros. Marcos Ros is member of the European Parliament and, among others, of the CULT committee, the one that deals the most with education issues. Thank you very much for being with us, for accepting to participate. I will perhaps take advantage of your presence here to ask some blunt questions about your role. Here we are mostly addressing ways forward to move away from standardized assessment practices in schools and elsewhere. The idea that co-creative evaluation can be more valuable for learners and educators. And since you represent the EU legislation in a way, I want to understand what kind of work is the European Parliament doing in supporting this process, given that, I mean, the EU does not get to have a say legally binding in education.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you to all the panelists. Regarding this question, as you have said, also the European Union does not have competencies in education. It has competencies in coordination, and it has the necessary tools to promote these changes. This is always very important to keep in mind. A part of the European institutions and even within our European Parliament is dedicated to the proposal, study, and debate on education policies. It is a great concern and a very important issue for the European Union. And a clear example of this interest is our commitment to, for example, to the Erasmus program. If there is one movement that has generated a European identity, also no competencies in education and university, is the Union flagship program in the field of education. Indeed, the actual Erasmus Plus program was presented as the most inclusive since the launch of this flagship European Union program, as it is expected to triple the number of participants to 12 million people. And it will be endowed with a significant budget, close to 25,000 million euros, which is a significant increase compared to the amount of the previous program that was close to only 15,000 million. And from our group, it has been a constant request to increase the funding of this program, of which we requesting a tripling of this budget for this period. Although this had not been possible, the result obtained shows that the role of parliamentary pressure on behalf of the citizen really works, and we are very happy of that. And these programs will be much more inclusive and open than previous years by offering access to learners in higher or general education, vocational training, adult education, and others. But furthermore, as a natural evolution of the Erasmus and the European higher education area, just over 2 years ago, the European Commission took a major step forward by publishing its official communication on European education area. And in the Parliament response to this legislative initiative, I had the opportunity to work as rapporteur for the Socialist Group. Among our priorities, it always be ensuring inclusive, accessible, and affordable quality education for all, promoting lifelong learning, improving the working conditions of teachers and educators, reducing the gender gap in education, and increasing public spending on education. And furthermore, speaking on competencies, which is the issue of this webinar, our group defends the need to reconsider the future of education in Europe and to propose a possible reform of the treaties in order to give more competencies to the European Union in the field of education. I think it's very important that that issue, because only together we can improve the quality of education and the well-being of pupils.
Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive overview. I'm very happy that you touched upon the Erasmus Plus budget, because you might remember that, well, actually, you might not remember since this is your first term, but we lobbied extensively your colleagues in the past term for an increase in the Erasmus Plus budget. We believe that it can really become the education program of the EU. So you mentioned rightfully that you were shadow rapporteur for the European education area, and now we've seen with the European Commission's proposal on pathways to school success that it does take into account the well-being of students in its goals. What's your position on the proposal?
Well, for sure, from the Parliament, we are always open to receive the proposals that the Commission make, be the communication or recommendation. And in this sense, this strategy tries to address one of the main problems we currently have in the education system, which is reducing low achievement in basic skills and increasing secondary education attainment. And in fact, in the Parliament has already asked the Commission and the Member States to reach ambitious targets in these fields, such as the one concerning to the proportion of low achievers and early school leavers, reducing the first parameter from 15 to 10, and the second one from 10 to 5%. And yes, you are right. Student well-being is very much present in this proposal. This is positive because it means broadening the classical perspective of education system to address other aspects that have not been considered before and that have a considerable impact on education outcomes. And this initiative is within the European education area. And while I fully support this recommendation and the action it envisages, we cannot forget the most important thing. To implement this new educational area as soon as possible, the European Commission must do so by 2025, which is the push that the Parliament has given in our report, as they originally promised. But there are no signals that the European Commission is working to implement this European education area. And I think it's fundamental to start promoting the well-being of students in all the European Union countries, to have a unique system or to have a harmonized system, which is the European education area. Only this way we can ensure that this measure come into force, that this pathway to school success and the renewed framework for action can become a reality. The recommendation also doesn't enter into the so much into the well-being, also addresses a growing problem, and I am very committed and concerned about this problem: bullying and cyberbullying. And the shadow of bullying has always haunted our children, but now, for the children who suffer from this hell, not even their home is a refuge, because every time they take their mobile phones or their pockets out of their pockets, they are confronted with such cruel violence. And with the spread of social media, these attacks have been taken on a complexity unimaginable a few years ago. So I believe that the European Union must go further in the fight against cyberbullying. We need Europe-wide studies that yield accurate data. We need to know the causes and origins of this violence, and we need tools for prevention and assistance to those who suffer from it. we need to put in place a major European strategy to combat bullying. And in this way, we are proposing the European Commission to face against this problem all across Europe. The well-being of the students must be addressed and on the strategies, educational strategies, and one part of the well-being strategies of the students, is to avoid them for suffering bullying and cyberbullying.
Thank you. Thank you also for bringing this up. This is actually a very important point. We've seen today in this webinar, and this is my last question since I know that you have to leave in 2 minutes. We're seeing today in this webinar that there are lots of good practices, lots of ways forward. And I wanted to ask you, can the EU Parliament and yourself perhaps support those practices, support the teachers and the students, since they are the leading forces in the change? Is there a place for these practices in your daily work?
Yes, first of all, I would like to recall that the European Parliament is the only one institution in the European institution that is chosen directly by citizens. So we, the members, we are direct representatives of the citizens, and therefore we owe it to them to support and work for the society. Moreover, in my work as a member of the Committee on Culture and Education, I always try to be very close to the educational institutions, teachers, and students, for example, on my country and in my region. And we can also contribute to the relation between organizations to provide information and to support for events like this one we are at today. We have an individual responsibility to do so as members. But in addition to the direct support that each member can give in his or her activity, one of the central tasks of our Parliament is the control of the policies proposed by the government of the European Union. The European Commission, for example. When I was talking about the Parliament report on a European education area, there were many requests that the MEPs in charge of this report put on the table in relation to the well-being of pupils. A key idea is that of placing the learner at the center of the learning process. This concept, although it seems obvious, it's sometimes not taken into account as much as it should be. We cannot have education systems that are based on staggered assimilation of competencies or on a linear curriculum that does not take into account the different phases of learning and skills. And indeed, in this report, we also argue that education system must not only cover knowledge and skills, but also enhance the well-being and physical health of a student. Finally, I will stop in a directly supported initiative of which I am very proud and very conscious of its positive work, which is the European Parliament Ambassadors School Program, as we know EPAS. This initiative aims at increasing students' awareness of European parliamentary democracy, the role of the European Parliament and the European Union institutions, and the European values. And it also encourages them to actively participate in European Union democratic processes. We have around 1,500 certified EPAs, building a network that offers schools a great opportunity to exchange best practices and cooperate in the implementation of the program. And it is a really good initiative, which I know very well because I have visited all the centers in my region that are part of it, and they do a commendable work which needs the full support of our Parliament and our institutions. So I think although we don't have competencies, we can stay beside the citizens and we can support them and we can help them to improve the well-being of the students.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for have to leave. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you. So where were we? We were with Sherto and Shanti explaining what the practices are, and I see the connection with the work of the European Parliament in a way that we can try to feed those practices to our decision makers. So Shanti, I think we were with you, and I wanted to ask you, you have already mentioned, Sherto and yourself, the connection between the relation-centered, the dialogic and collaborative practices. But what is really the connection with those practices and the well-being of learners and educators as it was depicted in the books?
Sure. And let me quickly hark back to the earlier question about the main messages of the book, especially in the light of what we just heard from the member of the European Parliament about efforts from above. This book is about efforts from below and tells us that essentially a message of hope that this side of utopia, this side of the rainbow in the world as it is, not as it might be, teachers and school directors are trying to change the system in their own ways and doing wonderfully creative and sensitive things. In the chat accompanying this event, there are many references and also about well-being and relational education. And let me pick up from the chat and continue what the MEP was saying about bullying. Children are not unkind to each other if they are in nurturing environments, but if they are in highly pressured competitive environments, these tensions have to find an outlet. Let me quickly use the words of the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, our language, to express some of the benefits of relational education. Think of the children we saw in the video at that school. They were related to as whole persons and not as minds to be filled with information to be regurgitated later. They were recognized as each as a unique person with their own distinctive way of learning. And we will hear more about how that was achieved. 900 different lesson plans in a school with 900 children, as a school director will tell us in a video that follows. Education in that setting was about intergenerational partnerships and about nurturing certain core capacities, which we will hear more from later from Dominic Richardson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanti, also for being so to the point. Do your books illuminate possibilities of scaling up these practices within public education and finding opportunities for systemic change in policy talks?
For sure, certainly, our book certainly does. If you read chapter 1, the story from Romania, how an NGO was able to turn a child-friendly assessment approach in primary schools into a nationwide alternative recognized and promoted by the national curriculum. If you listen to the launch, the recording of the launch of this book last year, I believe it will appear in the chat soon, you will hear a school director discuss how she was approached by the Inspectorate of Education, school that did not conform, and how she won the Inspectorate of Education over. If we look at these encounters between educational activism and policy making and inspectorates of schools, it is not this relationship, not one of confrontation, it is one of engagement. Of course, not as fluidly as I show it here, but more a struggle to find points of engagement. And when you find those points, to work forward with it. There are stories of success. Amidst all the many stories of struggle in this book, there are resounding stories of success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanti. Certo, the connections to well-beings in schools and to the learning process as cooperative participation for me are very clear. I was already convinced before starting this webinar, and I'm even more convinced now. But can you tell us a little bit more on how this all relates to global well-being, to a more holistic vision of well-being?
But first of all, I just want to thank Shanti. I read your book, and still every time you really recall a particular practice, it just brings back the excitement and experience when I was reading it. What I want to perhaps add, Andrea, if you allow me, just to say the complexity of evaluation, because we are not just evaluating children's experience or valuing children's experience, but there's also a teacher. And like those kids in the primary school, they were looking at the school as a whole. And then Chris in the audience, and they have worked with the young people in developing something that the government might use, a framework the government can use to evaluate schools and education as a whole. So, you know, these characteristics of relational practice, they really there to nourish what we may call our learning and well-being. But what to add to the complexity, I just want to mention perhaps how we evaluate teachers' work. We may say that teachers are among those who truly desire personal and professional development, and their practice reflect their concern. And for instance, their concern for quality of their learning, the care of the students' well-being, the strength of their relation with student colleagues, and also their place in the school as a whole. Now, how do we evaluate teaching in ways that speaks to these deeper concerns, and in ways also recognize the interdependence and mutual constitutiveness of learning relationship with well-being? So, Andrea, you see, I'm just slowly veered towards that sort of global well-being and the sense. So that means in education, evaluation should shift this spotlight away from the teacher as an isolated practitioner, but look at the relational process in which the teacher partakes, and of which the teacher is a part. So in our book, we suggest that evaluative practice must be comprehensive. And how this comprehensive evaluation can support teachers' professional practice, including their own learning, engagement, and responsibility. If it can do that, the comprehensive evaluation will be part of the teacher's sort of professional development. And in doing so in a classroom, teacher would engage self-reflection, but also peer evaluation, and also other kind of practice. Question is, how do we bring students into this process? Consulting student can be a way of doing it. How are we doing? If you just ask that question to the student, how are we doing, can immediately provide feedback to student practice. And now today we can record a lesson in a video so that we can share in the classroom and talk with students how can make the class more engaging. And maybe using simple questionnaire, appreciative inquiry, and using students to come together to have discussion groups and so on. These are all practice. But why this context connects to the global a sense of well-being? Because when you do an education in this way, you engage everyone, like earlier on we said, as co-partners, everybody feel heard, we listen to, we're heard, and then everybody will feel they can truly make a difference to this educational experience in schools. And that not only just means education is a teacher's responsibility, children and young people can feel this is our own responsibility too. So you can imagine that when we do education evaluation practice in this particular way, in that kind of experience of collaborative interdependence, this kind of work can make us realize that our well-being, our personal well-being, is the well-being of our peers, but also others in the community, expanding the experience of well-being globally.
And this is something that we should always remember. Our well-being is not only our well-being, but positively influences others as well. Shanti, final words before we move on?
Thank you. And since I don't want to take time when we talk about global well-being and well-being in schools and the connection, I could use the theory of change of the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, which of course you'll find on our website, but let me do it more simply and quickly by harking back to the video that we saw. Imagine a world in which children from that school could step out and could engage with joyful way of their school experience. Imagine a world of well-being based on relationships that are positive and nurturing. We're a long way from that yet. But what happens in schools does affect the world outside. Schools can't do it alone, but they can be part of wider change. And in the video that's going to follow from the teachers, we'll hear a school director say that her efforts are not just to make a more democratic school, a more sustainable school, and a happier school, but she says as a contribution to a more democratic world, a more sustainable world, and a more, her word, beautiful world. So if I can stop with that, Andrea, thank you.
That is a very nice note to end on. Thank you very much to both of you. Shirt, I don't know if you want to add something else to what Shanti said. For me, those are very beautiful words to conclude this session. Thank you very much for your agreement and your nodding. And thank you very much to both of you for having presented these two wonderful collections of practices.
Thank you.
We shall move on to the next session where we want to engage you with another video so that we can actually hear from a few of the teachers who have been cited and whose efforts have been recognized by policymakers. Please.
At assessment as being an ongoing process that aims to support progress in acquiring skills, developing competencies, while achieving the goals of learning for each child. In step by step, we look at learning as a continuous process, also with assessment constantly accompanying the process and the learner in order to support the learner rather than to judge or test him or her, where learning is the natural business of all children. Assessment must be an ongoing process to monitor where the child is learning in a manner that best suits that particular child, rhythm and orientation and trajectory.
To write a written report to a student or someone who's 18 who is going to take this report out and use it for whatever they want to do, you have to have a relationship with the student or have worked very close to in order so that you can write about how they have developed. It's based, a written report is based on the child itself or the student, and not on what they ought to have learned or what they ought to be at the end of school. We kind of document their learning process. And in order to document this process, we take the whole person into account. So it's not just the results of the various little tests you've been doing for the last, let's say, 2 years, but how have you implemented the help you got from the teacher, or how do you work with your classmates? All these things, they're taken into account. In order for you to be able to document that, you have to kind of enter a relationship with the student, which is more than just reading or listening. You have to understand, and you have to show an interest in their life and in their personal struggles and ups and downs. You can have a student who's struggling, who's finding the subject really hard, but really, really wanting to learn. And this whole enthusiasm, you get the luxury of writing down as well. So if he or she went to an exam, it probably wouldn't have gone so well, but and in a written report, I get to sit down and say, wow, you've done a fantastic job and you've really worked. Every time I said something to you, you try to implement it, and so on and so on. And so you kind of give them a picture of who they are, and that motivates them.
I founded Laterna Magica, and we created a space where children, professionals and parents can experiment with learning, living and working together. And the goal is to make the world a little more beautiful, more sustainable, social and democratic by a human-centered approach and authentic learning. A transforming education and every child to full bloom. Laterna Magica is a place where no child drops out. It's inspired by the original meaning of the Greek word for school, a place for free time, a free space, where you can learn from real life and for real life, where time is never split up into increments and never filled up. It's a place without barriers to learning, and barriers in the shape of classrooms, year groups, teaching hours, tests and subjects. But instead of this, authentic learning. Authentic learning with projects that serve the community, exhibitions, internships, field studies, and an authentic learning environment. We started in 2007 with 17 children, and nowadays it is a free space for 900 children with 900 individual development plans, 900 individual continual development pathways from the age of 0 till 12. And the key of our success, I think, is we did both. Most formative methods and a little summative. And we built a new framework of evaluation, and we did more than the inspection asked. We built the bridge, walking on it, and we are still walking on it.
Thank you very much, colleagues. This was very inspirational. I think that policymakers such as Mr. Ross before, but also the ones that we have engaged throughout past events need to hear from teachers like these. I would like to hear now from Dr. Dominic Richardson, expert in global policy-oriented research and lead social and economic policy research at UNICEF's Office for Research Innocenti, as well as from Ila Gregory, an educational activist who works with States of Mind, co-creating curricula to inspire self-inquiry in young adults. Welcome to both of you to the main stage. I feel like we've been put in the spotlight. It really feels like the stage here. So I would like to have a little bit your reaction to what we've seen so far. Perhaps I will start with Dominic. How would you put aside standardized assessment? How to put well-being at the center?
Well, I think I like most just now the reflection on free space and free time. I mean, we're learning so much from our work on the core capacities, as Shanti mentioned, that children are they're just not, they're cups in which you pour information. They're complex systems that the children need to have the time to reflect and relax and process the information they have. How can we do mindfulness? How can we process? How can we empathize? You know, how can we engage with the built and natural world around us without time? And so much of our time in schools is taken up now with assessment to understand, well, how kids are along in a process of us feeding them information and them repeating it back to us. I'm still of the mind that a lot of what we do in school is to standardize individuals and commodify in the long term as an interest in standardized curricula, which designed to advance children's reading, writing, and numeracy and prepare them for a global society. And all of that, over the past 30 years, maybe 40 years now, has crowded out human-centered learning and innate skills development. And I think we're seeing the consequences of it, which I'll elaborate on if that's your follow-up question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how can education highlight children's well-being?
It depends what you mean by education. Sorry to sort of pull it apart, but if we're talking about what children learn in school, then the school system and everything, in fact, all public policies designed to raise the next generation should be focused on their well-being. So it should be well-being root and branch. I mean, healthy individuals make for healthy families, healthy communities, healthy societies. I'd like to see schools spend more time on nurturing children's interpersonal skills, their innate skills, their self-regulation, the things that make us human, and those are the things that we can apply in every setting, not just in, friendships or loving relationships or at work or in school or university. It's everywhere.
Thank you.
And it also it helps you engage with not just other people and not just your tasks and your day to day. It helps you appreciate the world around you and engage with the what is evidentially, empirically proven healing role of nature, and engaging with the world around you in a holistic sense. So, how education can lead to well-being, the two, and if we're talking about learning in schools, one doesn't lead to the other. It should be well-being. They're one and the same.
Yeah, I like this. I like this way of thinking, even though you detoured my question, but it is very appropriate to refocus the purpose of education. I agree. I take the hit and I agree. Illa, let me turn to you, because I wanted to understand a little bit more your journey from a university student to an educational activist. What's the reason behind this transformation, and what was the thought process?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would kind of question how linear the question makes it sound. It's never as straightforward as that. And actually, I started being involved in educational activism before I went to university, and really learning about the damaging impact that traditional schooling and sort of the most standard schooling, which is the experience of school I had in the UK, has on our well-being, on our development as human beings, on our ability to connect with each other and to connect with other human beings and all the more than human life that we share the earth with. And actually that made going to university really difficult, because I started at this mythical place that I had been told was different to school. And I had been told for so many years, like, you're going to love university. And I know that you can't quite do what you want to do at GCSE, which is our age 16 big assessments, and A-levels, which is our age 18 big assessments. But you'll get to do it at uni. And I got to uni and I realized that it was very much the same, that I was once again a student, and that was it. That was all I existed as, that tiny little bracket. And in fact, there was a new element to it, which is I was now a consumer. And that's, I think, to do with a lot of the marketization and the role that capitalism plays in our universities. But it was very restrictive. And I see the sort of role that I now occupy and the engagement that I still have with education, despite not being in it, as more of an activist and a learner and with an interest, as much more expansive. So I guess those are the sort of emotions, feelings, experiences that necessitated that change was this feeling of being restricted, this feeling of being told, no, we'll come to that later. This feeling, you know, you can't necessarily still really study what you want to study because you get to do that for your dissertation or for your PhD or for your you're still having to study what people are telling you to. And I mean, that's something that within self-directed learning, I think is really special. And sadly, for a lot of us, doesn't come into our educational journeys at all.
I have to say that this resonates very much with me, including your introduction on the way that I made it seem as if it was a straightforward process. It really isn't. Life never really is. But it made me think. The last book I read is about, sorry, only in Italian, but still, is about how sometimes formal education in schools reproduce the very violence that they're supposed to be fighting through education. And while this book was especially geared towards the violence that lower income students experience in schools, it also brings about a vision where individualized learning experiences are better at reproducing the knowledge that formal education should then bring about. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you are the kind of activist that pledges for students and young people to be active actors, to be actively in the first row of education transformation. Can you tell us a bit more about this and why this is important?
Yeah, so I guess the sort of, why this is essential that you have young people at the center of discussions about what education should look like. And I'm very aware I am one young person. I'm not going to sit here and speak for like millions of other people. And I'm also, you know, I'm 20 now. So there are people who are younger than me, people still in the education system who need listening to. But so Ken touched on this earlier, that we are the ones experiencing education. And I say this, and I'm so aware that I'm not experiencing formal education anymore. It was much more powerful 2 years ago. But it doesn't make sense to not engage the stakeholders. Like, even if you looked at it as a business, you wouldn't not have relations with your clients. And as young people, what we want and what we long for doesn't, I can speak for myself, it doesn't feel considered by most education systems, and by the sort of the schools who are doing it differently, which has been, it's always beautiful to see schools that are doing it differently, and they don't feel accessible a lot of the time. And sort of touching back on what you were mentioning, Andrea, about the violence reproduced by these systems to especially lower income people. Like, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in the UK, a lot of alternative progressive education is private. And for those of us who can't afford private education, like, what do we do then? We have to go to state schools. We have to face testing that is violent, that is really damaging to our mental health. And so I think that what we can do, and what we can do as adults, is listen to projects that already exist by and from younger people. And there are sort of things that I'm involved with. There's a group called Youth X Youth, which is a collection of young people reimagining education and making sense making and meaning making, and recognizing that reimagining education isn't, again, it's not a linear journey. It's not one, we don't do it one time and then boom, we've got a beautiful education system. We have to continue doing it. And projects like States of Mind's research project with young people from all over London, from, you know, East London, and a lot of very diverse backgrounds who had a say in what they would like their educational evaluation to look like. And I think that's the most powerful thing that we really can do, is engage more young people and engage them in a way that's really, really listening and having assessment as dialogue. I think that's sometimes one of the most important things that we can do, is to just start the conversation and not to stop it. So yeah, that's what I would kind of urge everyone to do after this, is to keep it intergenerational. It's not just about there being young people and young people doing it alone. And it can't just be adults doing it alone. It has to be the two together.
Thank you very much. This is very inspiring. I'm very sorry that I have to cut short because I just had a look at the clock and we're supposed to finish in 2 minutes. So as you know, I have a long list of questions for the two of you, but I do want to go back to Dominic and ask Dominic, do you think that the education system can work without metrics, without standardized assessments and measures? What can it? And if so, what are these options?
Dominic, you're muted.
You're on mute, yes.
Wasting precious seconds, sorry. Yes, I think it can be done. I don't have an answer about how it can be done. I think it's worth reflecting that the way it's done right now, the numbers might add up, but we don't always get all of the children in. We're not really conscious of what those types of pressures are doing for the children or for the teachers, the working of the schools, the organization of communities around those schools. So right now it might be worthwhile just wiping the slate clean and spending some time on thinking about how to do assessment without numbers that turn into pressure. There's a nice phrase from Professor Goodhart. He says, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. That as soon as you put pressure on metrics to show you how well someone's doing, they change their behavior to improve their metrics. And that means we change the way we work with children the moment we put a measure on how well children are doing. And that means we need to be more qualitative and more child-centered and more intergenerational centered. What Ela was saying about bringing the generations together, make this work, well, it's the only way.
Ela, do you see an education system without standardized assessment coming to life?
I'm really, oh, it's okay, good timing. I just had some bells chiming. I do. And whether or not it's going to happen in a really lovely, happy way where we all, kind of join hands and will it into existence, I don't think that's, so I think it's going to be messy. I think it's going to take a long time. And I think things probably are going to keep going really, really wrong for the majority of people until they go right. But I think that this is what's important, is that if enough of us can learn how to do this, can learn how to relate in these different ways, then when we are the ones building new things, we do them differently. And I think it's ongoing journeys. I mean, it's not that like all progressive education is good and all traditional education is bad as well. I think it's important for us to not, break any of the binaries.
Yeah, this is very true. It's part of the holistic approach that we want to have on things, not to throw it all away or to start anew without having it clear, but to cross-contaminate systems so that we can find the best ways forward through trials and errors, in a way. Errors, we've seen them. We see them very much. But there are also inspiring practices that can lead the way ahead, as we've seen in this very webinar. So thank you very much to the both of you for staying with us and for providing good food for thought during this last hours. We are 1 minute late. I'm very sorry about this. One of my roles is the one of timekeeper. But I have to say that it was a very interesting webinar. Your perceptions, your experiences show us that while there is no easy answer, no clear-cut answer, the role that we have to play in trying to move away beyond standardized assessment for the well-being of learners is quite clear. So the questions continue, as does the struggle to establish educational processes that advance well-being. But this is the first opportunity to engage the educational processes and to engage in a systemic transformation in schools. I'm very happy that you have all taken part in this webinar. I'm very sorry to cut the Q&A session. I'm sure you will forgive me. You can expect a thank you email from the organizers with lots of links, lots of videos and presentations for your everyday practice, or even for your own curiosity. So thank you very much to all the speakers that have walked our floor, our digital floor today. I would like to close this event and perhaps remind us all that a lack of well-being means that the learning process is not going as well as it should be. Thank you very much.